Aerospace presents The Crimson Gate. Chapter 1, The Frozen Shore. Edmund stood at the prow of the longship, his knuckles white against the salt-worn wood. The sea stretched before him like hammered iron, grey and unforgiving, while behind him the coast of Norway grew smaller with each stroke of the oars. He was 17 summers old, too young to lead men into battle, yet here he stood, the son of Jarl Thorfinn, thrust into command by his father's sudden fever. "You brood like an old woman," came a voice beside him. Rupert stepped up to the rail, his weathered face creasing into what might have been a smile. At 42, the strategist was more than twice Edmund's age, with silver threading through his dark beard and scars mapping a lifetime of campaigns across his arms. The men need to see confidence, boy, not a frightened child. Edmund's jaw tightened. "I am not frightened." "No," Rupert agreed, his grey eyes studying the younger man with an intensity that made Edmund uncomfortable. "You are terrified. There is a difference. Fear makes you careful, terror makes you hesitate, and hesitation, young lord, will get us all killed." The fleet consisted of 12 ships, each carrying 30 warriors, 360 men who had pledged their swords to Edmund's father and who now followed his untested son toward the disputed waters between their homeland and the northern coast of England. The English king, Ethelred, had been raiding Norse settlements, burning villages, and slaughtering families in retaliation for decades of Viking incursions. Now Jarl Thorfinn had called for vengeance, but illness had stolen him from the battlefield, leaving Edmund to carry out his father's war. "The island," Edmund said, changing the subject. "You said we would stop at an island." Rupert's expression shifted, something darker flickering in his eyes. Hjälmsey, the island of helmets, though some call it by other names, names spoken only in whispers. "What other names?" The older man was quiet for a long moment, watching the waves. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, meant only for Edmund's ears. "The Isle of Changing Stone, the Threshold, the Red Door," he paused. "I sailed past it once many years ago when I served your grandfather. We lost 3 ships in a storm and found ourselves blown far north of our course. We sheltered in a bay on the western side of Hjälmsey, and I saw something there carved into the cliff face. A doorway, Edmund. A doorway that should not exist, cut into living rock with symbols I did not recognize." Edmund felt a chill that had nothing to do with the sea wind. "What kind of doorway?" "The kind that calls to you," Rupert said softly. "The kind that promises answers to questions you have not yet asked. I told no one, not even your grandfather, but I remembered. And when your father fell ill, when the burden of leadership fell upon shoulders too young to bear it, I thought of that door. I thought of what might lie beyond it." "You think there is something there that can help us?" Rupert turned to face him fully, his scarred hands gripping Edmund's shoulders. "I think there is something there that can make us unstoppable, but I also think, young lord, that nothing worth having comes without a price. The question is whether you are willing to pay it." Edmund met the older man's gaze. In truth, he did not know if he was brave enough, strong enough, or wise enough to lead these men. He had trained with sword and axe since childhood, had learned the sagas and the laws, had memorized the lineages of the great jarls and the strategies of ancient battles. But knowledge and skill were not the same as experience, and he could see doubt in the eyes of the warriors when they looked at him. Doubt and something worse, pity. "Tell me about the island," he said. Rupert released him and turned back to the sea. "We will reach it by nightfall. There is a village on the southern shore, fishermen mostly, good people who will offer us hospitality. We will tell them we seek shelter from the coming storm." "What storm?" "The one I can smell on the wind," Rupert said. "The one that will give us cover to do what must be done." Chapter 2, Hjälmsey. They reached the island as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of copper and blood. Hjälmsey rose from the sea like the back of some ancient beast, all jagged cliffs and dark stone, crowned with sparse pine forests that clung to the rocky soil. The village, as Rupert had promised, lay in a protected bay on the southern shore, a collection of turf-roofed houses and smoking hearths that spoke of warmth and safety. The villagers greeted them with cautious welcome. Their headman, a weathered elder named Bjorn, offered them ale and dried fish, his eyes lingering on Edmund's fine cloak and the silver arm ring that marked his status. "You are far from the usual trade routes, young lord," Bjorn said, his tone polite but probing. "What brings a Jarl's son and such a fleet to our humble shore?" Edmund opened his mouth to answer, but Rupert spoke first. "We make for the English coast, but I have read the signs. A storm comes fierce and fast. We would shelter here for the night if your people will permit it." Bjorn glanced at the sky, still clear save for a few distant clouds. "I see no storm, strategist." "You will," Rupert said with certainty. "Before midnight, I would wager, and we would prefer not to meet it on open water with 12 ships to keep together." The headman considered this, then nodded slowly. "You may beach your ships in the bay. My people will provide what hospitality we can, though we are poor and have little to spare." "We have our own provisions," Edmund assured him. "We ask only for a safe harbor." That night they made camp on the beach, fires blazing against the growing wind. Rupert had been right about the storm. Clouds rolled in from the north like an invading army, dark and heavy with rain, and by the time the moon should have risen, the sky was a solid mass of black. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Edmund sat by the largest fire, surrounded by his captains, trying to project a confidence he did not feel. They discussed the planned assault on the English coast, the targets Jarl Thorfinn had selected, the tactics they would employ. But Edmund could see Rupert at the edge of the firelight, staring not at the sea but inland, toward the dark bulk of the island's interior. When the council finally ended, and the men dispersed to their own fires, Edmund made his way to the strategist's side. "Now," he asked quietly. Rupert nodded. "Now, while the storm covers our movements and the men are occupied with staying dry." They slipped away from the camp, climbing up from the beach into the sparse forest. Rupert led the way with the confidence of a man following a map only he could see, moving through the darkness with barely a pause. The rain fell harder now, cold and stinging, soaking through Edmund's cloak within minutes. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the twisted shapes of wind-bent pines. They climbed for what felt like hours, though Edmund suspected it was less. The terrain grew rougher, the forest giving way to bare rock and narrow paths that skirted terrifying drops. More than once, Edmund's foot slipped on wet stone, and only Rupert's quick hand on his arm kept him from tumbling into the darkness below. Finally, they came to a place where the cliff face rose sheer before them, a wall of black stone that seemed to absorb the lightning's flash rather than reflect it. And there, cut into the living rock as Rupert had described, was a doorway. It was massive, twice the height of a man, with a pointed arch that reminded Edmund of the churches he had seen on raids into Christian lands. But this was far older than any church, carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly, as if they shifted and writhed when caught in peripheral vision. The door itself was not wood or metal, but something that looked like polished obsidian, smooth and black as a raven's wing. "What is this place?" Edmund breathed, feeling his heart hammer against his ribs. "I do not know," Rupert admitted, "but I know what the old songs say. They speak of places between worlds, thresholds where the barriers grow thin, places where gods and men once walked together before the coming of the White Christ drove the old powers into hiding." Edmund reached out toward the door, then hesitated. "What if it is cursed?" "Then we are cursed," Rupert said simply, "but we are also dead men if we face the English as we are. Your father gathered this fleet to avenge our people, Edmund, but revenge requires victory, and victory requires power. Whatever lies beyond this threshold, I believe it can give us that power." Edmund looked at the older man. Seeing something in his face he had not noticed before, a hunger, an obsession barely contained. How long had Rupert carried the memory of this place? How many years had he dreamed of returning, of discovering what lay beyond the carved stone? "Together then," Edmund said, and placed his palm against the black surface. The door was warm to the touch, impossibly so, like sun-heated stone on a summer day. The symbols flared with sudden light, red as fresh blood, red as the copper sky at sunset, and Edmund felt a surge of energy race up his arm and into his chest. It was not pain exactly, but it was not pleasant either, a sensation of being pulled and pushed simultaneously, of being unmade and remade in the span of a heartbeat. The door swung inward without a sound. Beyond it lay not darkness, but a corridor of the same black stone, lit by veins of that same red light running through the walls like blood through flesh. The corridor stretched ahead farther than should have been possible, farther than the thickness of the cliff should have allowed, vanishing into a distance that seemed to shift and move. "It is bigger inside than outside," Edmund said, his voice barely a whisper. "Not bigger," Rupert corrected, stepping through the threshold. "Elsewhere, come boy, we did not come this far to turn back now." Edmund followed, and the moment he crossed the threshold, the sound of the storm vanished. The rain, the wind, the distant thunder, all of it cut off as if a door had closed behind them. He spun around and saw the opening still there, showing the storm-lashed cliff face, but no sound came through. It was like looking at a painting of a tempest rather than experiencing the thing itself. "The door closes at dawn," Rupert said, moving deeper into the corridor. "That is what I remember from the carvings. Whatever we find here, we must return before first light, or we will be trapped until the next sunset." They walked down the corridor for what might have been minutes or hours, time seeming to lose meaning in this place. The red veins in the walls pulsed slowly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat, and Edmund found himself matching his footsteps to that pulse. The air was warm and dry, tasting faintly of copper and something else, something older, like stone, that had never seen sun or rain. The corridor eventually opened into a vast chamber, so large that Edmund could not see the far walls or the ceiling, only darkness stretching up and away in all directions. But in the center of the chamber, illuminated by those same red veins, stood a structure that took Edmund's breath away. It was a building, or perhaps many buildings merged together, an impossible construction of towers and halls and archways that seemed to fold in on themselves, existing in more dimensions than Edmund's mind could properly comprehend. One moment it appeared to be a simple stone keep, the next a soaring cathedral, the next a labyrinth of interconnected rooms. And always, it was different, changing even as he watched, walls shifting, doors appearing where none had been, staircases climbing to places that did not exist. "The Hall of Transformation," Rupert whispered, and there was awe in his voice, and fear, and that same terrible hunger. The stories called it by many names, but this is what it was. A place where warriors came to be reborn, to shed their mortal limitations and become something more. "How do you know this?" Edmund demanded, tearing his eyes away from the impossible structure. "Because I can read the words written in the stone," Rupert said, pointing to the walls of the chamber. And indeed, now that Edmund looked, he could see that the walls were covered in runes, thousands upon thousands of them, each one glowing faintly with that red light. "They tell the story of this place. They tell of the ancient kings who built it, who discovered the secret of binding power to flesh and bone. They tell of the price that must be paid for such gifts." "What price?" Rupert's smile was grim. "Blood, boy, always blood, but also time, also life. The power this place offers is not given freely. It is borrowed, drawn from the years of your life yet to be lived, pulled from the future into the present. The stronger you become, the faster those years burn away." Edmund felt cold despite the warm air. "You are saying it will kill us." "I am saying it will make us unstoppable," Rupert corrected. "For a time, long enough to win your war, long enough to carve your name into legend. Is that not worth the cost?" "And if I refuse?" The strategist turned to look at him, and in his eyes Edmund saw something almost like pity. "Then we return to the ships, sail to England, fight our battles, and most likely die unremarked and unmourned, just 2 more corpses on a battlefield already piled high with the forgotten dead. Or we step through those doors, claim the power that waits inside, and become the stuff of sagas. The choice, young lord, is yours." Edmund stared at the shifting structure, watching doors appear and disappear, seeing stairs that led both up and down simultaneously. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to flee this place and never speak of it again. But he thought of his father lying fevered in his hall, of the warriors who followed him expecting leadership he did not know how to provide, of the English armies that would crush them if they met in open battle. He thought of his fear, his inadequacy, his youth. And he stepped forward. Chapter 3, The Trials. The moment Edmund crossed the threshold into the Hall of Transformation, the world shifted around him. He was no longer standing beside Rupert in that vast dark chamber, but alone in a stone corridor that had not existed a heartbeat before. The walls were close here, oppressive, and the red light seemed brighter, more urgent. A voice spoke, not in his ears, but inside his mind, words in a language he should not have understood, but somehow did. To claim power, you must prove worth. To prove worth, you must face truth. To face truth, you must look within. The corridor opened into a circular room, bare except for a single object in the center, a sword, plain and unadorned, stuck point first into the stone floor. Edmund approached it cautiously, every nerve on edge. He had heard enough sagas to know that magical trials were never as simple as they appeared. He gripped the hilt and pulled. The sword did not move, but the world did. Suddenly, Edmund was no longer in the stone room, but standing on a beach he recognized, the shore near his father's hall, under a sky of perfect summer blue. Before him stood a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a beard the color of flame and eyes like chips of ice. "Father," Edmund breathed. Jarl Thorfinn smiled, but it was not a kind expression. "My son, come to claim his birthright. Tell me, boy, what makes you worthy to lead our people?" Edmund opened his mouth to answer, to recite all the things he had been taught, all the reasons he should be followed. But the words died on his tongue because he knew with a certainty that cut like a blade, that this was not really his father. This was something else, something wearing his father's face, and it was asking a question that had no good answer. "I am not worthy," he said finally, the admission tearing itself from his chest. "I am young, untested, and afraid. I do not know how to lead these men. I do not know how to win this war." The figure that wore his father's face tilted its head. "Then, why are you here?" "Because they need someone," Edmund said. "Because my father is dying and there is no one else. Because running away would be a different kind of death, a slower one, eaten away by shame and regret. I am here because I must be, not because I am ready." The beach dissolved. Edmund stood again in the circular room, but the sword was gone, replaced by a second doorway. He walked through it. This time he found himself in a hall he did not recognize, grand and high-ceilinged, filled with warriors feasting and drinking. At the head of the hall sat Edmund himself, but older, perhaps 30, with a golden crown on his head and a scar across his cheek. This older Edmund raised a horn of mead in salute, and the hall erupted in cheers. "See what you could become," the voice in his mind whispered. "See what power can give you." But Edmund looked closer and saw other things. He saw the fear in the eyes of the servants, fear of displeasing their king. He saw the tension among the warriors, men who smiled but kept hands close to their weapons. He saw, in a dark corner, a woman weeping silently, and though he could not see her face, he knew somehow that she wept for him, for what he had become. "Power without wisdom is tyranny," Edmund said. "Victory without honor is meaningless." The vision shattered. He passed through 3 more trials, each one stripping away another layer of pretense, forcing him to confront not his weaknesses, but the lies he told himself about his strengths. By the time he emerged into a final chamber, he felt hollow, scraped clean of illusions, raw and exposed. Rupert was there, leaning against a wall, looking exhausted. "You made it," the strategist said, and there was genuine relief in his voice. "I was not certain you would." "How long?" Edmund asked. "Hours, maybe longer. Time is strange here." Rupert pushed himself upright. "But we both passed the trials, which means we both may claim the gift." The chamber contained a pool, circular and perhaps 10 feet across, filled with liquid that was not quite water. It was thicker, more viscous, and it glowed with that same red light that permeated the entire structure. Runes were carved into the stone rim, and even without understanding them, Edmund could sense their meaning. To drink was to change. To change was to become something more and less. "Together," Rupert asked, echoing Edmund's earlier words. "Together," Edmund agreed. They knelt at the pool's edge. Edmund cupped his hands and dipped them into the liquid, which was warm and tingled against his skin like pins and needles. He brought it to his lips and drank. The taste was indescribable, copper and honey and ashes all at once. The sensation was worse. It felt like swallowing fire and ice together, like every nerve in his body igniting simultaneously. Edmund gasped, tried to cry out, but no sound came. His vision went white, then red, then a black so absolute it seemed to swallow thought itself. When awareness returned, he was lying on his back on the stone floor, staring up at darkness. His body ached, but it was a strange ache, like muscles that had been worked to exhaustion and then somehow rebuilt stronger. He sat up slowly and looked at his hands. They looked the same, but felt different, more solid somehow, more real. When he flexed his fingers, he could feel the strength in them, not just ordinary human strength, but something beyond, something that sang in his bones and whispered promises of what he could do. Beside him, Rupert was also sitting up, moving like a man testing a new body. The strategist caught Edmund's eye and grinned, and for the first time, that expression reached his eyes. "Do you feel it?" Rupert asked. "Yes," Edmund said, and he did. He felt like he could tear apart stone with his bare hands, could run for days without tiring, could face an army alone and emerge victorious. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. "Come," Rupert said, climbing to his feet with fluid grace that had not been there before. "We must leave before dawn closes the door, and then, young lord, we have a war to win." They retraced their steps through the shifting corridors, and this time Edmund noticed things he had missed before. Bones, scattered in alcoves and side passages, human bones, some ancient and crumbling, others newer. Evidence that they were not the first to seek this place, and perhaps not the first to claim its gift. But also evidence that not everyone who entered made it back out. The storm had passed when they emerged onto the clifftop. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, the first hint of dawn painting the horizon in shades of grey and rose. They made their way back down to the beach in silence, each lost in the feeling of the changes working through their bodies. The camp was stirring when they arrived, warriors emerging from shelters and rekindling fires. If anyone noticed their absence, they said nothing, but Edmund caught several men staring at him with expressions of surprise, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. "You stand differently," one of his captains said, a grizzled warrior named Gunnar, taller somehow. "The storm has passed," Edmund said, deflecting. "We sail with the morning tide." Chapter 4, The English Coast. They made landfall on the English coast 3 days later, beaching their ships in a protected cove and sending scouts inland to identify targets. Edmund had planned to move cautiously, to probe the English defenses and strike only when confident of victory. But the power burning inside him made caution seem like cowardice. "There is a village 5 miles inland," the scouts reported. "Perhaps 200 souls, with a small garrison of English warriors, maybe 20 men. We strike tonight," Edmund decided. Rupert raised an eyebrow but said nothing, simply nodded and began organizing the attack. 200 men would march, leaving the rest to guard the ships. They moved through the English countryside like shadows, swift and silent despite their numbers, and Edmund felt as if his senses had been magnified, hearing every bird call, seeing every movement in the darkness, smelling the smoke of the village's hearth fires from miles away. The attack was over almost before it began. The English warriors fought bravely, but they might as well have been children fighting men. Edmund moved through them like a storm wind, his sword seeming to cut through armor and flesh with equal ease. He was faster than he should have been, stronger, more aware of every threat and every opening. Beside him, Rupert fought with the calculated precision of a master craftsman, every movement economical and deadly. Within an hour, the village was theirs. The English warriors lay dead, and the villagers cowered in their homes, awaiting their fate. "Burn it," one of Edmund's warriors suggested. "Show them what it means to raid our lands." But Edmund looked at the frightened faces peering from doorways, at the children clinging to their mothers' skirts, and something turned in his chest. These were not warriors, not enemies, just people trying to survive in a world that had grown suddenly violent around them. "No," he said, "take what supplies we need, nothing more. These people are farmers, not soldiers. Our war is with Ethelred and his thanes, not with children and old women." He saw surprise in his warriors' faces and some disappointment. Viking raids were supposed to bring plunder and slaves, not mercy. But no one argued, not with the way Edmund had fought, not with the new aura of command that seemed to radiate from him like heat from a forge. They marched back to the ships laden with food and silver, leaving the village intact. And Edmund told himself that this was honorable, that this was right, even as a small voice whispered that he was simply afraid of what he might become if he gave in to the urge to destroy. Over the next 3 weeks, they struck 6 more times, each attack more successful than the last. Word of the Norse raiders spread through the English countryside like wildfire, each retelling making Edmund and his men more fearsome, more legendary. The English called him Edmund the Red, for the crimson cloak he wore and the red light that seemed to glow in his eyes when battle fury took him. But it was during the 7th raid that everything changed. They had targeted a wealthy manor house, home to a thane named Godric who had led several brutal attacks on Norse settlements. The plan was simple: strike at dawn, kill Godric and his personal guard, seize his treasure, and return to the ships before reinforcements could arrive. The attack went perfectly, too perfectly. Godric's warriors fell quickly, and Edmund found himself standing in the manor's great hall, his sword red to the hilt, breathing hard despite not feeling even slightly tired. The power inside him sang with satisfaction, eager for more, always more. That was when he saw her. She stood in a doorway at the far end of the hall, a young woman perhaps 18 or 19 years old, wearing a dress of deep blue wool with her blonde hair unbound around her shoulders. She held no weapon, showed no fear, simply looked at him with eyes the color of summer sky, eyes that seemed to see past the blood and the fury to something underneath. "You are Edmund," she said in Norse, her accent thick but understandable. "Godric's men spoke your name before they died." Edmund lowered his sword but did not sheath it. "And you are?" "Aelfwin," she said. I was Godric's ward, though I suppose that means nothing now that he is dead." "You are English," Edmund said, aware of how obvious that statement was. "You should fear me." "Perhaps," Aelfwin agreed, taking a step forward, "but I have found that fear and wisdom rarely occupy the same space. You could have killed everyone in this hall. You could have burned this place to the ground. Instead, I watched you spare the servants, send them running before you breached the doors. I watched you kill only those who raised weapons against you." She tilted her head. "So I ask myself, what manner of Viking raider shows such restraint?" Edmund felt Rupert move up beside him. "We should go," the strategist said quietly, "before her people come looking." "My people," Aelfwin said, her voice sharp, "were slaughtered by Godric 2 years ago. He took me from a burning village not unlike the ones you have raided. I am no more English than you are, not anymore. I am simply someone trying to survive." There was something in her voice, a pain that Edmund recognized because he had heard it in his own thoughts during those trials in the Hall of Transformation. The sound of someone who had lost everything and was still trying to figure out how to keep living. "Come with us," Edmund said, surprising himself as much as Rupert. "What?" the strategist hissed. "Come with us," Edmund repeated, looking at Aelfwin. "You say you have no people, no home. Neither do I, not really. I lead men to war, but I do not know where that war will end or what I will become before it is finished. But I can promise you safety for as long as I am able to provide it." Aelfwin studied him for a long moment, and Edmund had the uncomfortable feeling of being judged, weighed, measured. Finally, she nodded. "Very well, Edmund the Red. I will come with you, if only to see what manner of man makes such offers to his enemies." They sailed back to their camp that evening with 3 chests of silver, barrels of good English ale, and one young woman who sat in the stern of Edmund's ship and watched the English coast recede with an expression Edmund could not read. Rupert waited until they were well out to sea before pulling Edmund aside. "What are you thinking, boy? She is English. Her people are our enemies." "Her people are dead," Edmund countered, "and she speaks Norse. She could be useful." "Useful," Rupert repeated, his voice flat. "Or she could be a spy, a threat, a distraction you cannot afford. Edmund met his eyes. I know what I am doing. Do you? The older man shook his head. The power we claimed, it changes more than just your body, Edmund. It changes how you think, what you desire, what you believe you can have. Be careful that it does not make you foolish. But Edmund was not listening. He was watching Aelfwine, where she sat wrapped in a borrowed cloak, her golden hair streaming in the wind, and he felt something in his chest that had nothing to do with power or war or destiny. He felt hope. Chapter 5, The Impossible. Over the following months, Edmund's raids became legendary. They struck deeper into English territory, taking on larger forces, and never once did they taste defeat. The power from the Hall of Transformation seemed to grow rather than diminish with use, making Edmund and Rupert faster, stronger, more deadly with each battle. But Edmund began to notice other changes as well. His hair, once dark brown, now showed streaks of grey at the temples. Rupert's scars seemed to multiply overnight, appearing on skin that had been unmarked the day before. And sometimes, in moments of quiet, Edmund could feel something inside him burning, consuming, eating away at something vital he could not name. Aelfwine became his shadow and his conscience. She learned to treat wounds, to negotiate with captives, to speak for Edmund when he needed someone who understood English customs and thought. The warriors accepted her grudgingly at first, then with growing respect as she proved her worth time and again. And between Edmund and Aelfwine, something grew that was more dangerous than any power, more impossible than any magical hall. It started with conversations, late at night when the camp slept, and they sat together by dying fires, talking about anything except war and death. She told him about her childhood in a village by the sea, about her father who had been a fisherman, about the morning the Norse raiders came and her world ended. He told her about growing up in his father's shadow, about the weight of expectations he could never meet, about the fear that still haunted him despite everything. "You are not what I expected," she said one night, her voice soft in the darkness. "When I heard the stories about Edmund the Red, I imagined a monster, a creature of pure violence, but you are just a boy, frightened and trying not to show it." "I am 19 summers," Edmund protested weakly, "not a boy." "And I am 18, Aelfwine countered, "which makes us both children playing at being adults, pretending we know what we are doing." She was quiet for a moment. "The power you have, the way you fight, it is not natural. I have seen you move faster than eyes can follow, watched you break iron with your bare hands. What are you, Edmund?" He should have lied, should have deflected, changed the subject, anything except tell her the truth. But the trials in the hall had stripped away his ability to lie to himself, and apparently that extended to lying to her as well. "I do not know," he admitted. "Something more than human, but less than immortal. Something that burns brighter, but for a shorter time. Rupert says we are borrowing years from our future, spending them now to be strong enough to win. But I feel those years slipping away, Aelfwine. I feel time itself feeding on me like a hunger that can never be satisfied." She reached out and took his hand, and her touch was warm and real and grounding. "Then perhaps you should stop fighting. Walk away from this war, from this destiny everyone seems to think you must fulfill. Just be Edmund, not the Red, not the Raider, not the future king, just a young man who deserves to live." "I cannot," he said, though the words hurt. "Too many people depend on me now. My father is dead." The news had reached them 2 weeks earlier, carried by a supply ship from Norway. Jarl Thorfinn had finally succumbed to his fever, dying in his bed while his son fought a war across the sea. "I am the Jarl now. I am their leader. I cannot abandon them." "Even if it kills you." "Especially then," Edmund said. "What good is a long life spent in cowardice?" Aelfwine pulled her hand away, and there was anger in her eyes now. "That is pride speaking, Edmund, not honor. You think dying young in battle makes you noble, makes you a hero. But heroes are just dead men whose stories make the living feel better about their own failures." They did not speak for 3 days after that argument, but when they did, when they finally faced each other again, something had shifted between them. The anger had burned away, leaving only truth underneath. "I cannot stop," Edmund said, "but I also cannot lose you. Those two facts are tearing me apart." "Then do not lose me," Aelfwine said simply. Whatever time you have, whatever days remain before this power consumes you, spend them here. With me, let that be enough." So they became lovers, secretive and fierce, stealing moments between raids and battles. Edmund knew his warriors disapproved, that they saw Aelfwine as English and therefore enemy, but he also knew none of them would dare speak against him, not after everything they had seen him do. Only Rupert dared to voice his concern. "You are making a mistake," the strategist said one evening as they prepared for another assault. "This English girl, she is a weakness, a vulnerability. Your enemies will use her against you." "She has a name," Edmund said coldly, "and she is not a weakness." "Love always is," Rupert shot back. "I have lived longer than you, boy, fought in more wars, seen more men die, and I have learned that the moment you have something to lose, you start making decisions to protect it instead of decisions to win. You are becoming cautious, Edmund. You hesitate. That hesitation will get you killed." "Then I will die," Edmund said, "but I will die having lived, having loved, having been more than just a weapon pointed at enemies. Is that not worth something?" Rupert's expression was unreadable. "Ask me that when the English have a blade to her throat and demand your surrender, then tell me if it was worth it." Chapter 6: The Turning Tide. The winter of Edmund's 20th year brought disaster. They had pushed too far, grown too bold. Edmund's fame had spread throughout England, and King Ethelred had finally marshaled his forces to meet this threat. An army of 5,000 men marched north, led by the king's own son, Edmund Ironside, a warrior as formidable as his name suggested. Edmund's force numbered barely 800 now, reinforced by ships from Norway drawn by tales of plunder and glory. They could have fled, returned home with their victories and their spoils. But Edmund's father's voice echoed in his mind, demanding vengeance, demanding victory, and the power inside him screamed for battle, always more battle, more blood, more triumph. They met on a field south of York, on ground still frozen with winter's last grip. The English army spread across the landscape like a steel tide, banners snapping in the cold wind, shields forming a wall that stretched from horizon to horizon. "We cannot win this," Rupert said. And for the first time, Edmund heard genuine fear in the strategist's voice. "We are outnumbered 6-1. Even with our power, there are limits. We need to retreat, regroup, find another way." "No," Edmund said, watching the enemy host. "We did not come this far to run. We fight, we win. That is what we do." "That is what we did," Rupert corrected. "Past tense. Look at yourself, Edmund. Look at me. Your hair is white. Mine too. We have aged 20 years in 10 months. The power is consuming us faster now. Can you not feel it? Every battle takes more, burns hotter. If we fight today here against these numbers, it will kill us. Even if we win, it will kill us." Edmund knew Rupert was right. He could feel it, the way his bones ached despite his supernatural strength, the way his vision sometimes blurred at the edges, the taste of copper always in his mouth. He was dying, had been dying since that night on H. Jalmsey, but he had chosen to ignore it, to pretend that youth and power would last forever. But he also knew, with a certainty that went beyond reason, that this was the moment everything had been leading toward. This battle, this field, this cold winter morning. He could run, could preserve his life for a few more months or years, but what would be the point? He had been given power for a purpose, had claimed destiny with both hands. To turn away now would make it all meaningless. "I am going to fight," he said quietly. "You do not have to follow me, old friend. Take the ships, return to Norway, tell my people what happened here. Let there be someone to remember." Rupert was silent for a long moment, staring at the English host. When he finally spoke, his voice was weary beyond measure. "I have followed you this far, boy. I will follow you to the end. But know this, I am not doing it for glory or honor or any of those pretty lies we tell ourselves. I am doing it because I dragged you into that cursed hall. I gave you that cursed power, and if you are going to die because of it, then I deserve to die beside you." They clasped arms, and Edmund felt the strength in Rupert's grip, strength that matched his own, strength that was killing them both. "For what it is worth," Edmund said, "I do not regret it, any of it." "Liar," Rupert said, but he was almost smiling. The battle began at dawn. Edmund led the charge himself, 300 warriors at his back, while the rest held the camp and the ships. They hit the English line like a hammer, and the power inside Edmund exploded outward, making him a figure from legend, a creature of pure destruction. His sword cut through shields and armor like they were parchment. His strength sent men flying like dolls. His speed made him untouchable. Beside him, Rupert fought with cold efficiency, every strike a killing blow, every movement calculated for maximum effect. Together, they carved a path deep into the English army, and for a moment, a glorious, impossible moment, Edmund thought they might actually win. Then Edmund Ironside met them in the center of the chaos. The English prince was enormous, nearly 7 feet tall, and he wielded a war hammer that could crush a horse. He came at Edmund with a roar, and when they met, the impact drove Edmund back 3 steps, the first time in months any opponent had moved him even an inch. They fought for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, trading blows that would have killed ordinary men, neither able to gain decisive advantage. Around them, the battle raged, but all Edmund could focus on was this towering figure and his hammer, each strike coming closer to breaking through Edmund's guard. Finally, Ironside's hammer connected with Edmund's shoulder, and despite the supernatural strength that should have made him nearly invulnerable, something cracked. Pain exploded through Edmund's body, bright and savage, and he fell to one knee. The English prince raised his hammer for the killing blow. It never fell. Rupert crashed into Ironside from the side, bearing him down, and for a moment the 2 men grappled in the frozen mud. Then Rupert's dagger found the gap in Ironside's armor, slid between his ribs, and the prince's eyes went wide with shock and pain. But Ironside's hammer fell one last time, catching Rupert across the skull with a sound like splitting timber. "No," Edmund screamed, and the power inside him exploded in a wave of force that sent every nearby combatant flying. He reached Rupert's side as the strategist collapsed, blood pouring from the terrible wound in his head. "Got him," Rupert whispered, his eyes already glazing. "Got the bastard. That is something right." "Rupert, hold on, we can." "No lies," Rupert cut him off. "Not now, not at the end." He coughed, and blood flecked his lips. "I am sorry, Edmund. Sorry I brought you to that island. Sorry I made you into this. You deserved better than to be my weapon." "You gave me a chance to be more than I was," Edmund said, tears streaming down his face. "You gave me a chance to matter." "And it killed you," Rupert said, "just slower than it killed me." His hand found Edmund's arm, gripped it with fadding strength. "Run, boy, take your English girl and run. Let this be enough, please." Then Rupert's eyes fixed on something beyond Edmund's shoulder, and the light went out of them, and he was gone. Edmund knelt there in the blood and the mud, cradling his friend's body, while around him the battle raged on. He should have stood, should have fought, should have led his remaining warriors to victory or death. But the power that had sustained him, that had made him more than human, suddenly felt like a chain, a curse, a burden he could no longer bear. The English were closing in, sensing victory. Edmund's warriors were dying, overwhelmed by sheer numbers, and Edmund simply knelt there, broken inside in a way that had nothing to do with his shattered shoulder. Then Aelfwin was there, somehow, impossibly, pulling him to his feet. "Edmund, we have to go now." "I cannot leave him," Edmund said, still holding Rupert's corpse. "He is dead," Aelfwin said, her voice fierce. "You are not yet, but you will be if you stay here. Edmund, please, if you ever loved me, if anything we shared mattered, then run. Run with me, let us survive this." Edmund looked into her eyes, those summer sky eyes that had somehow become his entire world, and he felt something break inside him. Not his body, not his power, but something deeper, the chains of destiny and duty and all those pretty lies Rupert had spoken of. "Together," he whispered. "Together," she promised. They ran. Chapter 7, The Price. They fled to the ships, Edmund's remaining warriors covering their retreat. Less than 100 men made it back to the beach, from the 800 who had started the day. The English pursued, but did not press too hard, content to claim victory and let the survivors escape. Edmund ordered the ships burned, all but two. We take what we need and nothing more. Anyone who wishes to return to Norway may take the second ship. I will not lead you anymore. I will not be responsible for more deaths. Most of the warriors chose to sail home. Only 20 remained, those too wounded to travel or too loyal to abandon their Jarl. Edmund divided what silver remained among all of them, kept nothing for himself. "Where will you go?" Gunnar asked, his arm in a sling from a sword cut. "South," Edmund said, "somewhere the stories have not reached, somewhere Aelfwine and I can disappear." "The power you have," Gunnar said slowly, "it is still there, I can see it. You could rebuild, gather a new army, try again." "No," Edmund said flatly, "I am done with war, done with destiny, done with all of it." They sailed south along the English coast, staying close to shore, avoiding major settlements. Edmund could feel the power inside him still, burning, consuming, but he tried not to use it, tried not to draw on those stolen years. Maybe if he stopped fighting, stopped pushing, the curse would slow, would give him a few more seasons with Aelfwine. They found a small village in the south of England, a fishing community too remote to have heard tales of Edmund the Red. Edmund traded the last of his silver for a small house near the water, and he and Aelfwine tried to build something like a normal life. For 3 months it almost worked. They fished, they mended nets, they helped their neighbors with heavy work. The villagers accepted them as refugees from northern wars, asked few questions. Edmund's hair turned fully white, and he began to need reading glasses for close work, something that would have been absurd for a man of 21 winters. But Aelfwine stayed beside him, and that was enough. Until the night, he woke to find her weeping. "What is wrong?" he asked, reaching for her in the darkness. "I am pregnant," she whispered. 2 months, maybe 3. Edmund felt as if the ground had dropped away beneath him. A child, his child, the one thing he had never allowed himself to consider because he knew, had always known, that he would not live to see it grown. "That is wonderful," he said, trying to inject joy into his voice. "No," Aelfwine said, "no it is not. Because you are dying, Edmund. Every day you grow older, weaker, I can see it. The power that made you strong is eating you alive, and there is nothing I can do to stop it." "We will find a way," Edmund said. "There are healers, wise women who know herb lore." "This is not something herbs can fix," Aelfwine cut him off, her voice rising. "This is magic, curse, whatever name you want to give it. You sold your future for power, and now the bill has come due. You will be dead within a year, probably sooner, and I will be left alone with a child who will never know their father." Edmund pulled her close, felt her shaking against him. "Then we make what time we have count. We love each other, we prepare as best we can, and we hope that is enough." "It is not enough," she sobbed. "It will never be enough." But there was no other answer, no solution to the price he had agreed to pay that night on Hjälmsea. So they held each other in the darkness and tried not to think about the future. Summer turned to autumn, and Edmund felt himself fading. He no longer looked 21 or even 30. He looked 50, 60, ancient before his time. His hands shook. His vision blurred. The power was still there, could still be called upon, but each time he used it, even for something as simple as lifting a heavy beam, he felt another piece of himself burn away. Aelfwine's belly swelled with their child, and Edmund felt a desperate urgency to see that child born, to hold his son or daughter even once before the end. He almost made it. The baby came early, on a cold night in late autumn, 2 weeks before Edmund's calculations had predicted. Aelfwine's labor was hard, hours of pain and blood that left her weak and pale. But when dawn finally broke, Edmund heard the cry of his daughter, his child, the one good thing he had managed to create in a life otherwise marked by violence and death. He held her for perhaps an hour, this tiny perfect creature with Aelfwine's blonde hair and his own grey eyes. She gripped his finger with a strength that seemed impossible for something so small, and Edmund felt his heart break and mend simultaneously. "Her name is Sigrid," he whispered, "for my mother, if that is acceptable to you." "It is perfect," Aelfwine said, exhausted but smiling. "She is perfect." "Protect her," Edmund said, feeling the power inside him guttering like a candle in the wind. Make sure she knows that she was loved, that we both loved her more than anything. Edmund, no, not yet. It is time, he said gently, handing the baby back to her mother. I can feel it. I have been holding on through Will alone, but there is nothing left to hold on to now. I am sorry, my love. I am so sorry. Do not apologize, Aelfwine said, tears streaming down her face. Not for this, not for loving me, not for giving me her. Edmund kissed them both, his wife and his daughter, and then he walked outside into the cold morning air. The village was just waking, smoke rising from chimneys, fishermen preparing their boats. Edmund made his way down to the beach, where the waves rolled in eternal rhythm, unconcerned with human drama. He sat on the cold sand and looked out at the horizon. He thought about Rupert, dead on that frozen field. He thought about all the warriors who had followed him, trusted him, died for him. He thought about the Hall of Transformation and the price written in those glowing runes, the price he had been arrogant enough to think he could afford. He thought about Aelfwine and Sigrid, and he hoped with everything remaining in his failing heart that they would survive, would thrive, would find happiness after he was gone. The power inside him finally went out, not with drama or pain but with a soft sigh, like a fire reduced to embers and then to ash. Edmund felt it go, felt the last stolen years burn away to nothing, and with them went his unnatural strength, his impossible speed, everything that had made him Edmund the Red. What remained was just Edmund, a boy who had wanted to be worthy, who had wanted to matter, and who had paid a terrible price for that ambition. The sun rose fully, painting the sky in gold and red. Edmund closed his eyes and did not open them again. 30 years later, in a great hall in the north of England, a woman with golden hair touched by silver stood before a gathering of jarls and thanes. She was wealthy now, a widow of status, having married well after Edmund's death and built a life for herself and her daughter. That daughter, Sigrid, stood beside her, a woman grown with children of her own. They had come to this gathering because word had spread of a saga, a new poem about a legendary warrior called Edmund the Red, who had fought against impossible odds and won glorious victories before dying young in battle. The skald sang of Edmund's courage, his strength, his conquests. He sang of the magical power the hero had claimed, of the hundreds of enemies he had slain, of the English kingdoms he had brought to their knees. It was a glorious tale, full of violence and triumph, and the kind of clean heroic death that made young men yearn for battle. Aelfwine listened to it all with an expression Sigrid could not read. When the skald finished, and the hall erupted in cheers and stamping feet, Aelfwine stood. The hall quieted, curious about what this foreign woman might say. That is a beautiful song, Aelfwine said in Norse, that was now flawless after decades of use. Full of drama and glory and all the things that make for a good tale, but it is not true, or rather, it is only a small piece of the truth, shaped to be more palatable. She walked into the center of the hall, and every eye followed her. Edmund was real, I knew him, I loved him. And yes, he claimed a terrible power and used it to win battles. But the songs do not tell you what that power cost him. They do not tell you that he aged 40 years in the space of one. They do not tell you that he died not in glorious battle, but on a beach, alone, his body consumed by the price of his ambition. They do not tell you that he left behind a wife and a daughter who would never know him, never hear his voice, never feel his arms around them. The hall was silent now, the celebrating mood gone. The songs make him a hero, He was a fool, a boy who thought power was the answer to fear, who believed that being strong enough, being legendary enough would make him worthy. And perhaps he was worthy in the end, but not because of the power, because he learned too late that love matters more than glory, that life matters more than legend, that being remembered as a hero is poor compensation for never getting to grow old. She paused, looking around the hall at all the young men with their bright eyes and their dreams of glory. So enjoy the songs if you wish, drink to Edmund's memory, but do not, I beg you, try to follow in his footsteps. The price he paid was too high, and it is not one anyone should have to pay again. She sat down, and the hall remained quiet for a long moment. Then Sigrid stood beside her mother, placed a hand on her shoulder, and said in a voice that carried to every corner, "My father gave me life, but my mother taught me how to live it. Remember both lessons, and you will have learned something worth knowing." The Jarls and Thanes nodded slowly, sobered by the words of these two women who had loved Edmund and survived him. The Skald never sang that particular saga again, at least not in its original form. And when people spoke of Edmund the Red in the years that followed, they spoke not just of his victories, but of his price, not just of his strength, but of his sacrifice. It was not the glorious legend Edmund had once imagined for himself. But it was true.